I mean, this is an issue for a lot of people, is what philosophy they started with, how they see the world. If it's purely a material world, if they're following pure materialism, it's really hard to have a conversation about this idea that consciousness extends beyond the body or may exist afterwards. It's tough to do that because they're already biased against any possibility of that. But the thing to remember is that just because you can fake it doesn't mean it's not real. I mean, Hollywood has shown, entertainment industry has shown us that from theatrical days, before motion pictures, that you can fake something. And today it's really easy with CGI to fake things. It doesn't mean that the real thing doesn't exist or has not existed.
As we keep hearing across the globe when it comes to spiritual consciousness or awareness or some scientism version of self, you being an expert and a master of, parapsychology, paranormal activity, why don't you elaborate or expand on panpsychism and what that really would entail or mean to someone who might have just heard it for the first time?
Well, panpsychism is a philosophy alongside of materialism and dualism and other philosophies that suggests that consciousness is everything, that really everything has some degree of consciousness in it. And there are variations of how people interpret that. Interestingly enough, there is a philosopher Giulio Tononi, who actually came up with a book and an idea that his definition of consciousness was the ability to process information. So all living things have consciousness. It's just that how much consciousness or the kind of consciousness they have depends on how they process information for things. And that kind of makes sense in many respects, I think.
Yeah, I mean, for the layman, I guess that would be something close to, the old fuzzy-haired dude, bending of reality, Max Planck unit of energy, some type of physics sort of model where everything's entangled.
Yeah, and technically, I mean, everybody's talking about quantum entanglement these days and all of that. And it's used sometimes as a metaphor for people being psychic. But really interesting is that we are all entangled. I mean, every bit of the planet Earth, other than the meteoric dust that falls from the sky throughout the year, which is not a huge amount, but we're all made of star stuff to begin with anyway. And we're all coming from the same material. So when you talk about entanglement, that particles have been in touch or connected to each other, we are all entangled with everything on the planet.
Wow. And so how has it served you? We got a little echo here. I don't know. What number is that? 225. Do you have a double? How is that? Hello, hello, hello. Okay, it works. If we talk at the same time, just talk. Hello, hello, hello. Just say something.
Yeah, hello. Hello.
Hello. Okay, it seems to be all right. At one point, it was like an echo. I just want to make sure my wife is neurotic with this stuff. She'll be like, "How did you let this happen?" I'm like, "Oh my goodness." Okay. I'm just messing. So I think if we're not speaking at the same time, I think there's no echo. Boom. How does someone, like yourself, explore paranormal stuff, and what does that really mean to you?
Sure. So the word paranormal has been used since the 19th century in reference to any experiences or activity that seems to be on the side of normal. Supernatural is a different thing altogether. It's on the side of normal. And really, we're talking about for the application in my field, we're looking at how people have experiences and abilities and even encounters that just don't fit, in some respects, the cultural norm, not even the reality norm in many respects. Because the fact is that people have so many psychic experiences around the world for thousands of years that none of what we talk about, whether it's ghosts or ESP or mind over matter, none of that is paranormal. It is normal. It is rare, perhaps, but it is in us and around us, making it normal. So what parapsychology studies is phenomena of consciousness. Specifically, we look at information that comes in to us, to our consciousness, to our brains, however that works, without the use of the normal senses, without the use of logical inference, or even guesswork. And we call that extrasensory perception, which people have always talked about as a sixth sense, but it is not a sense. A sense requires a biological organ or some part of the body. We're not even sure the brain is involved here. So it's really perception, which is when you gather all the information and get a picture of the world. That's what ESP is. It's non-sensory perception. That includes things like telepathy and remote viewing and precognition, knowing things before they happen, all of that. Then we look also at psychokinesis. That's our term for mind over matter, where our minds can affect physical matter and energy, because that's a physical thing also. So energetic processes as well. And of course, that runs the gamut from the idea of telekinesis or levitation to psychic healing. Energy healing in many respects falls under that category. Metal bending, affecting computers or other devices, all of that's psychokinesis. And those two things connect directly also to the idea of consciousness surviving the death of the body, life after death. So we have a whole area of our field that looks at elements of experience and evidence that supports the concept that consciousness can exist outside the body, even when you're alive, or after you've died. And the thing that we have to always remind people about is that if you're talking to, we call them apparitions if they're here. I work with a lot of mediums, and the mediums talk about spirit as being on the other side. The ones we investigate are the ones who are here. So we tend to use the word apparition. That's kind of the ghost idea. People who haven't transitioned at that point. But that's still that communication. Any of that communication is telepathy. It's mind to mind. Anybody who sees a ghost is not really seeing the ghost with their eyes. That's very clear. That ghosts or spirits are not optical phenomenon, which is why not everybody can see them. If they hear a spirit, that's also not an auditory phenomenon. That's not a physical thing. It is all psychic perception. It's all ESP or non-sensory perception. And if that ghost moves something, that's psychokinesis. It's still mind over matter. So one of the biggest disconnects we have for people in the paranormal community, the ones who do ghost hunting, is that they don't think any of this is necessary to know. And actually, that's why they're not getting anywhere, other than their exciting technology, which really doesn't work. Survival also covers reincarnation. And there's a whole body of evidence of children who remember previous lives that baffles even the people who do not believe in survival of bodily death, because there's no other explanation for the best of the cases whatsoever, at least not in our science today. So we look at a variety of things across the board, but it's all about consciousness.
Now, it's interesting how you define it as non-sensory. How do you guys come to that conclusion?
Well, for one thing, you can put somebody in sensory deprivation and they can still pick up information.
Mm-hmm.
You can isolate people completely from sources of sensory input and they still pick up information. Remote viewing allows one, the best remote viewers can go thousands of miles, pick up information from thousands of miles away. That is absolutely not within sensory range. So it's very easy to say, here are the limits of our physical senses. There has not been any identification of anything. People have tried to see if there's a ESP center of the brain, and that doesn't seem to be the case. Mm-hmm. Or if there's some other structure in the brain. I mean, originally they thought telepathy was like having a crystal radio set in your head. And that was pretty clearly not the case either. So we can say it's non-sensory because there are no physical senses that have been identified for that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's fascinating. I mean, I've been teaching internal alchemy for over 30 years within a Taoist system. And we refer to everything as sensory perception. It doesn't really matter. Clairvoyance, mediumship, channeling, mm-hmm. It's another sensory perception. And I mean, I guess it's half a dozen one, six of the other. You could really correlate it in either direction, what you're saying or what I'm saying, because there's a visceral, somatic, kinesthetic response when.
Well, there's a response. Yeah, certainly.
Yeah. So the tuning fork being the body will give you the alignment of what is visual, what is audible, and you're experiencing it. And it's only clarified as you gather information that is verifiable within this material. And that's where it gets really fun and interesting as you start to connect the dots. A system like chakras is Hindu based, as opposed to Dantians within Taoism. We refer to them as energy elixir fields. So we actualize the chambers that are the three main chambers in the body, and they have 81 different phases of awareness. And as you turn them on, everything comes on, every sense that you could possibly imagine, and some, and more, and above. It doesn't really matter. It becomes sort of like you have to be a little mindful initially, because when you turn the lights on, you could possibly perceive yourself as having a psychotic break, because you're seeing things with your eyes open, and there's so much information coming in. It's hard to comprehend it if you don't have assistance initially. But when we refer back to things like remote viewing that I've been teaching people for as long as there's been rice on planet Earth, that again, ideomotor response is another validator, and most remote viewer friends of mine refer to that as ideograms, that they're creating a relationship, a language that gives them an understanding of what information is being transmitted from them. But it's still the body as an attunement. We use things like body dowsing as a conditioning that we use within Taoism, where we read from the emanation of self information, landlines, power centers, all that kind of vortices, all that kind of stuff that requires a very refinement, not a subtlety. One of my pet peeves is when people refer to the subtle effects, because you made a very good point, and I like to differentiate and make it very clear that perception is not imagination. And the fact that people hold on to that, you can conjure up a version of what you want. It's never going to hold weight until you've actualized the energetic potential within you. Then we can transfer over. But perception is immediately an experiencer's moment to be able to tap into, not conjure or create in my mind what that version might be. You have to hold the charge long enough or resonate high enough that it will be transmutable, that there's evidence that, oh, this actually took place, which is my favorite place to be, this psychokinesis place of goodwill. You mentioned mentalism. Let's speak about that. What part of that is curious for you? What do you explore with mentalism?
I am also a mentalist in that, alongside of my studies in parapsychology, I got into stage magic, and then that shifted over to mentalism, which is, making it look like things are psychic on stage for entertainment. Psychic entertainment, essentially, is what it is. The thing about perception is that we all have biases, and we're trained. One of the things I learned from magic is that we learn to perceive the world. We learn to interpret the world around us. And magicians, mentalists have been understanding that kind of thing and understanding kind of the rules of perception, have been able to hopefully entertain, but of course sometimes fool or sometimes con people in ways that go shift their perceptions, make them focus on different things. Because we can perceive a lot of stuff that we are not consciously aware of. I mean, we have, just with our normal senses, we get a lot of stuff that we're not even consciously aware of, let alone with ESP, with that. So I studied mentalism and magic partly because we have people approaching us in our field who are fraudulent. And we have situations, certainly when I go out and investigate, where it's really been good for me. And I'm a performer, so I can actually see how people react to this stuff. What's been really good for me has been going into cases where people think that their house is haunted or they have something going on. And our goal initially, when we first go in, the first thing we do when we do investigations is to look for every little thing that they think is paranormal, to look for the alternate, a normal explanation for those things, because we're trying to study what is psychic or paranormal at the heart of it. And being trained in magic and mentalism, I've seen a lot of things that people just simply come to the wrong conclusions. They're not stupid. They just don't have the background for it. Things surprise them in certain ways. And depending on their belief system, or perhaps how many of those TV shows they were watching, they will come to a different conclusion for that. And that allows us to kind of allows me to cut through it.
Yeah, that's the juicy part, subjectivity. And then, of course, disassociation is the mother of glory holes when it comes to when you're emotional, you're suggestible, which is really part of the biggest, allure or the luring rod for so-called magicians, mentalists. Most of them, quite frankly, don't believe in the stuff that they do because there's a measuring stick that tells them otherwise. So like something like PK touch is very, very tangible and real, and they do it all day long from a distance, yet someone in an environment that's learnt how to, be illusionary and manipulative to someone in a close quarters, it's just a matter of angles, and then, of course, what level of manipulation you want to take it.
It's a lot of it's timing for PK touches. The thing to remember is that there's two things here. Number one, while it's not necessarily the case that most magicians or mentalists don't believe in this, that's what the story that we've heard thanks to the amazing Randy and other skeptics. There are many, many magicians who have had experiences. There are many, many people who are open. In the mentalism, the psychic entertainment world, we do have our skeptics, we do have our materialists, but we also have a number of people who have taken advantage of things that pop into their head, for example, during the shows that are there. But the thing to remember is that just because you can fake it doesn't mean it's not real. I mean, Hollywood has shown, entertainment industry has shown us that from theatrical days, before motion pictures, that you can fake something. And today it's really easy with CGI to fake things. It doesn't mean that the real thing doesn't exist or has not existed. And that's unfortunately the idea people have gotten from people like the late amazing Randy, that if I can prove to you that I can do it too, doesn't that mean that it's a fake? It's like, no, it doesn't.
Well, it's a big movement right now. A lot of people are super excited about telekinesis as being, a resurgence, astral projection. I just keep telling these youngins, it's like, listen, all it is a body-centric experience. You need to understand that your obsession with the idea of leaving the body in of itself is redundant. Once you do it once, you program yourself, all of a sudden you recognize you are everything and nothing at the same time. You can go from your bedroom to a shooting star, to Mars, to England, to another dimension. And that is if attuned correctly, is a very visceral, somatic, kinesthetic thing. Yet, I find that all the mentalists out here in Vegas, they get a little prickly and a little hard when I want to interview them, because I understand the levels. There's like people like, David Blaine or even Darren Brown, where they are achieving certain levels that are, definitely beyond the simplicity of a trick. They're conditioning themselves to create this sort of scenario. Not all of it is just illusionary. Would you agree with him?
Yeah, and I know some of the guys who are in Las Vegas who have been there. The issue, really, in many respects, for a lot of them is this is an issue for a lot of people, is what philosophy they started with, how they see the world. If it's purely a material world, if they're following pure materialism, it's really hard to have a conversation about this idea that consciousness extends beyond the body or may exist afterwards. It's tough to do that because they're already biased against any possibility of that. And they'll sometimes come up with all sorts of alternative explanations that make no sense. I mean, less sense than what they're saying, what we're saying in some respects. But there are people like Alain New, who has performed in Vegas quite often, who's had some PK experiences himself and has worked with people in our field. And so it's not a blanket thing out there, but I think that Blaine has gone well beyond magic to more stunt work and some of the stuff that Houdini did, kind of
Endurance.
pushing his body to the possible limit. Darren Brown is an amazing mentalist. Actually started out as an actor and was trained by someone else and has just taken that with hypnosis and other things to a different degree altogether. But not everybody in the world of mentalism and magic is like that. So,
well, yeah, I find it fascinating with most magicians. You'll literally be like, so what's your understanding of hypnosis? I don't have one. Whoa. I'm sorry. Did you just tell me you don't even use something as basement level entry as a hypnagogic state to manipulate the audience? For me, I like going down to the strip and playing street magic with my kids. The first thing I ever taught them was hypnosis. It's a baseline entry level. Once you condition yourself through the alchemy, which I teach, you just put out a resonance. You won't even speak a word. And this might be hats off to Mesmer, but you enter their biofield and they will literally start to transcend into this state because you're admitting a frequency, just like anything else. That's all it is. But you have to condition yourself for that type of thing. But I love erasing people's names and I turn into Justin Bieber and all that kind of good shit, because that somnambulistic state is something that they claim it doesn't exist, or very few people are able to drop into this state because of their own environment. But I think it's also, what are you prepared? What do you accept? And I've never had an issue with it.
Well, it's not only what do you accept. I mean, I don't work at all with hypnosis in my shows. Never have. And it's just not something I felt fit with what I wanted to do, the kinds of things I wanted to do for entertainment, which a lot of it has humor when I perform.
Yeah.
And that's the case with a lot of the, I think a lot of magicians are more interested. Well, there are a lot of magicians who are just basically card mechanics. They're jugglers. This one thing I've seen over the years, and I had a good friend of mine who was a really amazing card magician, and his goal always was to come up with new sleight of hand methods or moves that would fool magicians who were experts in card magic. And he did constantly, because of the way he was suggesting. I mean, he was using psychology and other things to suggest that. But too many of the folks who get into the magic world, because there's card tricks you can buy from any magic dealer, are all about the cards and not about connecting with people. And it's really that connection with people that helps with entertainment. Otherwise, yeah, it's a really cool trick, but it's just a cool trick. So a good mentalist is trying to connect with the audience in a lot of different ways, but mainly it's for entertainment for most of us.
Well, yeah, I mean, mentalism is still playing with the periphery. So you're absorbing information. If I scratch my back here and I ask you to think of a number, and next minute it's like, oh, 6. And I go, really? That's very interesting. Take a close look right here. Right. And I have drawn the number 6 on my hand in a fleeting second. What are the chances of you absorbing that amount of external information at once? Well, it's very common, because that's how human beings process shit. And that's where people go, whoa, what does that mean? Well, I don't know. This is a conversation I want to have with you. I personally do not believe there's free will until otherwise noted. You have to be aware of awareness. You know what you know, you don't know what you don't know. So free will is conditional until otherwise arrived. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, I tend to believe in free will. I know that there are circumstances that we're in, especially with other people, where we're not in control specifically of our decisions all the time. It can be the environment. It can also be other people and their behavior. And that could be intentional or unintentional. So I think free will in specific circumstances may have its limits for things. But in general, yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, but in general, I do believe that we make our own future, whether that's good or bad. There is an element in looking at psychic ability, looking at ESP, that sometimes we find ourselves in situations that are either positive or negative for ourselves because part of us has picked up information from the future or picked up information about that situation and guided us. But that's still us that's doing it. It's still guiding part of us that's guiding us, again, for good or for ill, for whatever reason.
No, you make a good point. Maybe I should reframe it. What I believe is your margin of convergence happens when you're aware of the whole picture, which only happens when you're able to raise a transmission. Fundamentally, when I've been measuring my brain waves over all these years, high points of convergence is epsilon or lambda or above.
Okay.
You get into gamma. That's when I witness physical healing. That's gamma all day long. I always tell people, if you're able to bend metal, you can watch flesh meld back into one piece. And people are like, what the hell are you talking about? It's no different. I've been watching it for 40 years.
I would completely agree with you. I've run many spoon bending parties over the years. The whole psychology behind them, which was somebody, actually an aerospace engineer, based it on a psychologist named Ken Batcheldor, who was studying telekinesis. And the fact is that most people in our society are brainwashed. I hate to say educated, but we're brainwashed to actually not even want to acknowledge when something psychokinetic happens, whether it's healing or metal bending or something floating through the air. We will rationalize that away. We will just ignore it completely. We are inhibited from being witnesses to that and acknowledging it. But more than that, we're inhibited from owning it, that believing that we can do it, because it's a scary thing for people to think that their thoughts can get turned into action. And I've taught people PK. I worked with a man named Martin Caden, who was a science and science fiction writer. Really well known. I mean, he was a pretty amazing guy. There'll be a documentary coming out next year about him and his life, part of which is covering his telekinesis that he taught me and what he did. And it really boiled down to what limits we set on ourselves. And this is not just psychically, this is also physically. I mean, Roger Bannister ran the 4-minute mile in 1954. Physically impossible to do that before him. And all of a sudden people could run a 4-minute mile. So we consistently as human beings set limits on our intellectual growth, on our activity, on our physical activity. So when you see people bending metal, bending spoons, part of what I do and what I've been taught to do was to get people into a state where they don't care. They basically are acting very goofy, silly. We often call them spoon bending parties or PK parties, because we want people to be having fun and not even think about the fact that this spoon is flopping over on its own until later. And activity happens consistently that way because you're pulling them out of that barrier of ownership resistance, that this is really happening. And that should be the case actually with almost anything that one can do. I mean, we've had some amazing people in parapsychology studied who could do some pretty amazing things psychokinetically, including healing, like you talked about. But also, there was a woman who was able to visually bend a laser beam, like cause the laser beam to curve in an enclosed system. This is years ago. Now, this is, of course, anecdotal because they didn't really write it up since nobody really thought anybody would believe it. But I talked to my colleagues who actually saw her do it more than once. What does that mean if you can bend light? Yeah. I mean, there's a potential.
What potential is? Yeah.
Our potential is a psychic I worked with back years ago at the American Society for Psychical Research used to say that if we could actually get past these blocks that we have, probably wouldn't need to worry about transportation much anymore.
Yeah. I mean, that's why it's kind of exciting for someone who's sort of a novice or a newbie, that you can enter into something as basic as a hypnotic state and dissolve, the fundamentals, like the critical faculty. These are integrated belief systems that really are hindering, just like you said, they're hindering. So what does it take to jump over the firewall and enter into the abyss of unlimited potential? This is a conditioning, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think that part of it would probably be what my friend Martin Caden taught me and showed, that when people see someone do it, it breaks some of the barriers down.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
the thing is, we don't see people doing these really amazing things, like mending skin, or mending. We don't see that because there's so much of a push against it in our society, and especially from mainstream science and medicine at this point.
It's counterintuitive, but for me, I've been doing this so long, I just do it. I don't sit and go, hey, I need someone to come and measure this, because I know when I hit 40 hertz and above, I'm witnessing physical healing. It's happening. It's already there. It's convergence at its peak, past, present, and future, all as one bang. You're going to see it, but it's not going to come in. Sitting here as San Qing with my incense, calling in my angels. It's happening now. Just like when you bend metal, you are like so beyond whatever's going on now that everything just merges. And I'm not a big psychonaut, but most people can confirm with what I see. I see things meld, wiggle, and return back to its original state. And a lot of psychonauts that have experienced these exogenous sort of influences speak on these types of visual experiences. This is how I see it. When metal bends or flesh melds, it's the same thing. It just wiggles, and then it gets smaller wiggles, and it gets smaller wiggles, and until it returns back to the original state. And I just recently had my mother fell and hurt her knee. My wife just took a look at her, started to massage her knee. Her knee was the size of a bowling ball, and it shrunk down to this in about 5 minutes, maybe. These are all normal sort of processes, but I've also been very comfortable with it for over 30 years.
Yeah.
And it's not something, but I have used the integration of Taoist alchemy to help people find these sort of techniques and refine them, because they're and that's the thing. What I refer to as sensory perception is really a validation of that by learning these techniques that go deep and deep inside the system. And when you really codify the system, the alchemical system, these things happen really easily. So once things become really tangible, you think telekinesis and things start moving. That just never excited me, to be quite frankly.
Sure.
Things like levitation. I've only ever seen 3 people levitate in my life. 2 were Indonesian masters in the jungles of Indonesia, and they were personally bankrupt. They were bankrupt from a moral compass level. They were not good people. Yet they would levitate 6. I measured 7 feet in the air.
Wow.
And you can't make this shit up. I wasn't smoking anything, but they were smoking a bag of weed. They would smoke it all day long. Now, morally corrupt individuals, and there's still this evidence of supernatural powers. And as you put it, these are normal abilities that need to be refined. And the system is simple. I gave the system to one of my students that is refined enough, and he was able to levitate 2 or 3 feet off the ground. But it's a compression. You have to compress and compact this stuff. And quite frankly, it could just be the placebo effect that you follow the system and you get the result. But it's been reinforced for so many generations within this stuff that it just works.
Well, there are, first of all, I think you're right. When we talk about this, the placebo effect, that's a belief thing. And if you believe whatever explanation you believe is causing it to happen, because we had one guy who actually he was definitely in a dissociated state. He was a magician friend of one of the people at the university, and he was just going to watch this whole thing, but he was so taken and bought into the visualization and the induction and the whole bit that he was bending stuff. And then the man who was running it, Jack Houck, handed him a 1-inch thick aluminum rod, and he twisted it into a pretzel shape. And later on, when I asked him, how do you think you did that? because he was saying, "Oh, it's all strength and stuff like that." He said, "I rubbed it hard enough so the friction caused the inside to melt, making it easy to bend." And I said to him, "Let me see your hands, because the melting point of aluminum is 1100 degrees, and your hand should be burned up at this point." So he rationalized how he did that because he couldn't accept that this was happening psychically or in any other way. Anthropologists, you talk about those levitations, anthropologists and other observers, there's a lot of literature that we have even in our field, but I have studied anthropology undergrad. There's an awful lot of literature out there where the anthropologists witnessing things like that in different cultures around the world, where the culture had no problem with it. I mean, that's the thing, is that their belief was this was possible. So certain people could do that.
Well, it's like an emptiness. If I just did a quick summary of what the technique is, you are emptying the body of any yang energy, and you're absorbing yin, and then you compress it between the dantians, the middle and the lower dantian. You start compressing it like a hydraulic system, and from that, shit just works, man. I've just seen it so many times. But for me, it doesn't move my needle. I'm not interested in. There is a level of conditioning. There is a condition. I need to warn people. This is not just like. And it could be. I'm not going to destroy people's belief system. You could possibly just get it and instantly go boom. It's happened. But I have witnessed that it takes a commitment to condition yourself to make that actually possible. Whereas I can, walk down the street and witness a healing in 3 seconds. And I didn't have to do anything. I wasn't exhausted. I didn't have to call the angels in. Boom.
Right.
That kind of thing.
Yeah. I mean, people come up with either because of who teaches them and how they're taught, or because of stuff that they've read, or sometimes wacky people who are really not able to do this, who come up with some other things as well. They will have all sorts of tradition, of rituals, mental rituals, visualizations to do things, all of that. And it just really depends on the individual. Then there are people who just can do it like that. I mean, it's pretty simple for that. It just really depends on how we can break through those barriers of belief. And there may be what we're seeing also when I teach a course in developing your ESP, and typically see that people take to certain applications of ESP. Same thing with psychokinesis. Like some people just seem to lean towards healing in PK, but if you wanted them to bend a spoon, they could never do it. And that also may be a belief factor, but their interpretation of who they are and their personal interest puts them in this direction, whatever it happens to be. And it certainly is the case with ESP. I've worked with several psychics who have worked with law enforcement. And just to give you kind of a really quick example, my late investigations partner, Annette Martin, who is a phenomenal psychic, who wrote a book called Discovering Your Psychic World, which is a workbook to help you figure out what you might be good at psychically. So it was like all these different abilities to test yourself, to try things, and knowing that you're probably not going to be able to do them all. Just find the ones you're good at, you feel comfortable with. She worked with police, with law enforcement. She was working actually directly with a homicide detective for a long time. And her method was to walk it. The police wanted to consult with her, either looking for a missing person, trying to find out what's going on. Tell me everything you know. That's what she'd say. And this took a lot of convincing for the police often, because they didn't want to reveal things that weren't revealed to the public, right? And they wanted to see if the psychic could pick them up. And she basically felt, look, you're calling me in to learn things you don't know. So if I only tell you things you know, yes, you'll see she's a psychic, but it won't be helpful. So she forced them to tell her what the missing pieces were, so she could focus on that information. Kay Ray, another psychic who worked with a police sketch artist. She would do psychometry on some object, the victim or the potential perpetrator, and she'd start describing. She'd see the face of the suspect, and they wouldn't tell her anything. She didn't want to know anything about the case. She'd see the face of this person that might be responsible, and the sketch artist would draw it based on her description. They'd hand it to the detective. He'd look, okay, that's who we thought it was. Thank you for confirming that. And
Wow.
or we deal with a map. So it just really depends on how people process and their belief system. Some people can do it like that. Other people have to work through a process.
Yeah, I mean, I let everyone know that I teach that you could wake up tomorrow and do everything at once.
I think that's good. Yeah.
Because I mean, I experienced it myself over 36 years ago. That never meditated before. I was a powerlifter and bodybuilder, and in the same week, I witnessed. First, I stopped sound for 20 minutes. The first meditation I ever did. Went straight into channeling my teacher, Latsu. Then I did a distance healing. Then I witnessed a physical healing where gangrenous flesh went back to pink in color, 40 minutes. And
Wow.
I'm completely normal. Then I had what is called the dark night of the soul for 7 days. Every thought, every feeling, every emotion. I was like ready for suicide. I was done by the third day. And back in those days, I couldn't pick up the cell phone or ask some AI, what is going on with my mental, emotional state? Why am I walking into a movie theater trying to escape the thoughts in my mind that just wouldn't stop? Images, energy, everything. And I'd see a naked woman walk across the screen and I'd throw up on the person in front of me. There was a whole visceral thing. And it was a transformation. By the time I got hold of the teacher at the time, he's like, oh, that's amazing. We call that a breaking. People have spent years trying to develop these. I'm like, you're out of your mind. And then I was stuck with another sort of component of being able to see everything at once. And then I had to regulate that auras, information, spirits, everything with my eyes open. And so whether I closed them or opened them, it was the same.
Right.
It was like insane. And you start to work with the information so it's manageable for the individual rather than it being so out of control. But, I refer to a wake-up call as what I call a psychic reading. I just give someone a quick summation of their mental, emotional, and physical state inside of 30 seconds. And I always start at the bottom, because if I start with the earth energy, what someone would perceive as a root chakra, I give them a little bit of an understanding of their own boundaries. And then by the time we get to sexual energy, they don't want any more. They're like, how do you know this? I don't know anything. I'm reading a menu. My gift is accepting everything at face value, and I'm childlike in my nature. And if I want to try everything once, that's my motto. I'll try anything once. And with that, it seems to have been very effective at obtaining these types of levels of awareness and then being able to train people. But that's where the alchemy comes in. It makes it fortifiable and repeatable, because there's too much stuff out there right now that you can't even make sense of. People just wake up and they're a reincarnation of Jesus, and I'll teach you how to do this and that. And it's like, show me. I'm a Pepsi challenge guy from the 80s. Show me. I'll take the Pepsi taste test with anyone. That's how it works. Instead of people are beyond too much information. You need to verify it through a document. They want to see it. They want to experience it. It's an experiences world. Have you noticed that?
I mean, I think we always hear the old adage, seeing is believing, but seeing is not believing. Experiencing is believing.
Very big difference.
Yeah. It is. It's just, the world is subjective for us. Doesn't matter how many people. I have arguments with people, come my colleagues who are materialists. Like, we have objective information. I said, actually, you're interpreting it subjectively. So, I mean, maybe the numbers on the paper are objective, but your interpretation is totally subjective. And there are people, there have been studies or reports of folks, even in the sciences, looking at kind of a sort of a dissociation situation, a little cognitive dissonance, where a researcher is presented with data that totally conflicts with their own personal view of how physics works, for example, how the world works, the theory. And they don't see any data on the thing. It's like, there's nothing here. They actually don't see it subjectively. Their perceptions are shifting, so they don't have to make sense of it in that way. And that's the ultimate in witness inhibition in some respects. So we, as human beings, are subjectively interpreting things. Our perceptions, sensory or otherwise, is all subjective. Emotion is totally subjective. That's consciousness. That's all part of consciousness. And there is, it depends on who you talk to, whether you think there's an objective world out there or not. There is that popular simulation theory, which I don't hold to. And
I just always tell people the only absolute truth is your truth. When someone else gives you an absolute truth, about face and run in the other direction. Because
right.
It's just like it's always going to be, it's your world and you're living in it. So
yeah, I mean, there's that old statement that we create our own, create your own reality. We do in our perceptions.
Yeah.
Not everybody sees the same thing. Not everybody hears the same thing. Not everybody smells this. It's just there are different things based on our backgrounds and how we're built and all of that stuff. You were talking before about a psychic breaking. We have this term called psychic opening, where someone suddenly gets too much information. And interestingly enough, in our world today, compared to, let's say, 30 years ago, we are bombarded with information. Online, offline, there's so much more information coming at us. I worry about younger people just because they are flooded with information and they can't pick and choose what they're trying to see very much. And that can be crazy making for people. That can really be emotionally harmful. It can be traumatic for people. And there's that tug on time to be aware of all the social media and everything like that, at least in our society. So people need to be aware that you can shut that stuff off. I mean, you can stay away from social media for a while. If you have a psychic opening, you can learn to focus on certain parts of what's coming through rather than actually just being inundated with it and having all these people babbling at you at one time.
Yeah, I mean, once it's refined, it's a blissful state. It's basically cheating, but I like it. I like it because it gets exciting when you do certain things. Like I'll only sit on one or two tables down at the strip there, and I'll play something like roulette, so it doesn't seem blatantly obvious.
Right.
That I'm, precognitively taking it in from, I'm getting it before it actually hits the ground running. So it's like when you do like 8 runs, 6 black, 2 red, 1 black, 8 red, and then I get it sweaty. My personality goes, okay, I'm going to cut this off because now I think that people are looking at me, because there's the probabilities of doing that, even though it's a 50-50, I make it very basic. It can get a little sticky.
Yeah, with the casinos. Yeah. A friend of mine who's a psychic was at a Native American casino in the Pacific Northwest, and she and her husband were there. She was playing blackjack, and she was up $22,000. And this woman sits down next to her and starts conversing with her, and asks her what she does for a living. She says, "I'm a psychic medium." And within 30 seconds, these 2 guys approached them and said, "We're going to have to ask you to leave, cash out and leave. And by the way, don't ever come back again."
Yeah.
Because the casinos are aware of what people are saying and all of that, and they don't want psychics in the casinos.
Yeah. I mean, you get someone who's just a basic, card counter, and they get a level up, and all bets are off. It's so much more fun when it is. It can be problematic. Me, I'm a little bit more touch and go because I live here. I don't want to be. Yeah. I don't want to be erased from the strip. If you know what I'm saying. It's not worth it. But
I would. People will say, "How come there aren't psychics out there and made millions of dollars?" It's like there probably are. You just don't know that they're psychics.
Yeah.
Because they don't want to admit it.
Yeah, I mean, it's always a lot of fun with that. But it's kind of like that type of basic, testing or transmissive experience. Someone would call it a spark of divinity, where, someone uses something as simple as, muscle testing or dowsing rods or, tarot cards, or all of this is just a transmission. Once you attune to whatever it is that you feel comfortable with, you start refining your information. People get surprised that that's possible. Take a pendulum. I can have a pendulum literally break off its chain just holding it in front of you, and it'll look like it's going 1,000 miles an hour. With this, which is what telekinesis is,
Right.
you're dictating the resonance that you're putting out and what you're connecting to. And so, with the telekinesis, do you teach people telekinesis also?
Yeah, a very, very basic form of that. Usually, I couple that with the spoon bending stuff. That's kind of the ultimate end of it. But what people just sometimes have a hard time going big, let's say, with things. So I teach what my friend Martin Caden taught me, which are just basically what are often called psi wheels or energy wheels. It's just a paper pyramid, or it can be made out of any substance. He was able to. He had a closed room he sat outside of, and the little wheels were all types of material, including actual pinwheels, which he got spinning in opposite direction from aerodynamics. Something physically impossible unless you really are using a direct airflow on things. And I'll get people moving them, but typically it's about connecting. So, people think when they watch movies, they see people doing telekinesis and their face gets red because they're concentrating so hard and the vein starts throbbing on their head. Looks like they're about to explode. It's the exact opposite. When people are doing PK, psychokinesis, they get very blank. I call it like the Vulcan mindset, referring to Star Trek. And we get people moving these targets, even under glass, even in sealed containers, but sometimes they have to see somebody do it. And usually I have somebody in the group who gets things moving right away. And that causes a chain reaction because people think it's pretty cool. And yet I've had people on occasion, once the thing starts spinning, they had one woman who literally, I was watching her and the thing starts spinning and her eyes get wide and she does this and backs away. And she totally freaked herself out. And she came to learn to do this. Once that happened, she couldn't do anything. Fear rose up in her is what happened. And so this is back to that ownership resistance thing that we have. She also wasn't able to bend any spoons later on. So she shut herself down.
Yeah, I mean, it is. It could be very easy or it could be very hard. It's really up to you. What does it really take to merge?
And it can take just being in a situation where it's okay to do it. Marty Caden and I did something at the University of Nebraska for about 100. It was 102 people in the audience, including a bunch of faculty members, a couple of physicists and others. And he went through the process, which is more of a visualization focus, and then feeling like you're part of the process. You're connecting, the target as part of you. And one person was able to get something going when he first talked through it. And then he did it, and the other person was doing it. And then slowly but surely more people did it. We had 52 of the 102 people who were able to turn these targets without any problem. And talking to the other ones, most of them were more fascinated watching the people doing it than they were trying to do it themselves. And I think that was the only reason they probably didn't turn the targets themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, this is fundamental for Taoist magic. I mean, that stuff is so ancient, but where the magic stuff I love to do. And people would be like, that's just insane. How is that possible? Not really. I mean, the system works over and over again. It just works. It's probably because millions of people have used it before me. But I mean, we just use 9-point grids and we connect with the constellations. And I mean, you could call it just a placebo effect, but it affects the external environment.
Right.
It happens instantaneously.
I think there are many different internal processes that people might go through, different ways of looking at it. There certainly are cross-culturally, but the end result is the same. And it's just more of a clothing, like we were talking about with tarot cards. Many psychics use tarot cards just as a stimulating image. They're not really, if you were to look up the meaning of those cards in the books, that's not what they're talking about. They're actually using those as triggers for them. And it just really depends on what you feel comfortable with, the way you think this works, the way you believe. It's really belief. Belief is the most correlated, connected, any sort of piece of being psychic that we've seen in the lab and outside the lab.
Yeah.
To the point where skeptics, people who don't believe in this stuff, tend to score negatively statistically, as if their unconscious is saying, no, don't score correctly, because if you do, you'll give them evidence. But scoring negatively, like getting 0 out of 25 when you're guessing cards, which we don't even do anymore, is statistically impossible. So, especially doing it over and over again, that means that there has to be some knowledge that is causing you to guess wrong.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, your ability to be anti-you is showing.
Right.
Your ability
Exactly.
it's like you're very powerful. You're a powerful sorcerer. It's like, oh, I can't manifest a new car and a bag of money, but you just manifested the anger, envy, and rage inside you right now that is at an epic 15. That's you controlling the panel of perception through your subjectivity. You're a creator, regardless. It just hasn't transmuted as something of value. You're like, oh, well, this is a negative thing, so it can't. I had nothing to do with that. No. Only enchanted, positive, whimsical things that are magical in a sense of something in a Hollywood movie. Then that's me. That's my ability.
Yeah. And what we usually tell people, I often get asked, how do I become more psychic? And first thing I can say is what number of psychics I've talked to over the years have said: notice you already are. That's number one. And number two, you got to learn to get out of your own way. Once you learn to get out of your own way, things will come flowing through.
Yeah. I mean, we boil it down to thinking is not knowing. Knowing is feeling. And so you move the process of the finite mind that's bankrupt and absolutely empty. It doesn't offer much until you supercharge it when you converge the two. When you converge both from a dualistic, non-dualistic perspective, if we want to get down to the nuts and bolts, it's that convergence that then your intellect is on steroids. Then you can tap into things. But that's that sort of the way we go about getting there is the conditioning internally through the alchemy that goes deep embedded into at a subatomic level. So you literally feel like a firework on the 4th of July. And that way it helps you disband any sort of anti-you nonsense. And it all comes down to that. And quite frankly, it's again another form of language that you're using to make it tangible. So
that makes good sense.
Well, that's why I love the alchemy. It's like you can have a spelky, and I mean, most people would say you're not the standard Taoist priest. You use the word F this, screw that, do whatever. Yet I am not. My participation is not required when I witness a healing. All I'm doing is the ambassador to the goodwill, the concierge to that resonance that I've conditioned myself to. That once it meets the same, equal to, or greater than moment, bang, you're going to see something that is transformative. So I'm not holding on to, some sort of ideal or theory or some type of version, because Taoism alchemy goes beyond that. Once you recognize you go through the center, and once you walk through the center, you are everything and nothing. So there goes the Taoism. You're Catholic, Christian, you're the universe, you're God, Buddha, Tao, whatever it is. It becomes complete. And that's what we refer to as that primordial mother, the holy stream, is the convergence of everything. And then now you're off to the races. It's like a disbanding of all sense of self or ideals or knowings that are conditioned into the system. You detach from it, where you feel empty. Nothing moves the needle for a while. People are like, what is going on? And it's a transitional period, and then you reattach, and now you are like on super steroids where your thoughts generate results. Like that means that, like, if you think it's not about, oh, please God, help me. No, you are the instrument.
Yeah.
That consciousness is emanating through this body, and you're the animation to everything. You don't have to ask anyone. It's boom, it happens instantaneously. But there's a process, and I find that works best for people to go through the process, so it solidifies, and it's not a transitory and permanent thing. It becomes permanent.
Yeah, I don't think that most people would accept even someone who they firmly believed in, just simply saying, boom, you turn yourself on. That's it. They need something to do to
Yeah.
get there, because that's what humans do. We need, even if it's watching a YouTube video, we need something to do to learn how to be something or to do something. And that's pretty clear. When people, I worked with, wrote a co-authored a book called ESP Wars, East and West, with the director of the Stargate program, the U.S. government's psychic spying program, which went for 23 years and started in the early 70s. Most people don't realize that, I talked about, the government was hiding all this stuff, except for the fact that the same researchers were doing research on the same thing and publishing it in journals and to the press, while they were having the remote viewers do secret viewings. Like the targets made them classified, not the actual remote viewing. And the remote viewers, most of them, Joe McMoneagle was like the best of the viewers. He co-authored the book with us. And it's really interesting that he felt that there's really not a process. I mean, there's all these people teaching remote viewing called controlled remote viewing, which requires putting a bunch of pieces of paper there, and this one's for color, and it's a very logical process. And it was designed by Ingo Swann, who was the guy who taught everybody. But it was designed as a training for CIA agents, field agents, at the request of the CIA, and it failed. It was not a good training. What Joe and others have found is that some of that can work, but you can teach somebody to do remote viewing, if they're open to it, in 20 minutes. And it's really more about, again, getting out of your own way. There's a very simple process for it, rather than a lengthy process for it, that's more emotional and more internal than it is thinking. It's not a thinking. In fact, it's a non-thinking process that's there, because as human beings, we are hardwired to name things, fill in blanks, to do all that. And that's not how psychic information comes through in that way. I want to just touch on one other thing you said, and the kind of the transmission of consciousness. There are many, many ideas in mainstream science now of what consciousness is. In fact, nobody's come up with a definition, a good one.
Or something that's evidentiary.
Right. And because it's so subjective in some respects. So one of the concepts is that that consciousness, whether it starts in the brain or not, but we are the receivers of consciousness and transmitters of consciousness. Consciousness is out here. And we're like a TV set, getting a signal from cable or satellite or streaming. And, because a lot of the materials will say, well, clearly somebody has brain damage. There's something wrong with their consciousness. But that's not necessarily the case, because if there's something wrong with your TV set, the cable signal's still coming through. The streaming signal can still come through. It's the interface that is having the problem, not the actual signal itself. And that makes when I explain things like that to people, they really understand that's a good metaphor for this idea that we receive and we connect with consciousness. It's not just in us.
Yeah, I love that. Within Taoism, we refer to metaphysics of Tao. Highest point of emanation is the mother, which is the void. She animates consciousness. Consciousness animates the spirit. Spirit animates energy. Energy animates the material state, the body, which is really a lower frequential distortion of energy. And so most people tend to just move between energy and the material world, and they never actualize anything. We have a conditioning process called Shen Gong, which is spirit power, where your attention and intention meet, and actualize the spirit in the material world. We refer to that as immortality crystallized in the material. And that's where you get down with the get down, where you actually are seeing evidence of the manipulation and pliability of reality through this stream that is what we call the pulse. It's completely constant, magnetized, whereas thoughts, feelings, and emotions and energy are impermanent. They're transitory. They hold charge and then they dissipate. They go back into the system. Whereas your true self as a whole is forever. It's an eternal thing, but you have to get there. Okay, this sounds fantastic. Okay, tell me. Think it right now when it's actualized. There might be a process for that. That the mind just, explodes, because it's like, whoa, what are you saying? I'm not my mind. That's not my, all thoughts of your mind are not yours. Then whose are they if they're not mine?
Right.
And then you just go down that rabbit hole, and people, they get more and more confused, and then they just, the paradox is suffering.
Yeah.
Really does
No,
get that.
understandable. You get people thinking about concepts that are outside their education and experience, and the philosophical underpinning of what they've learned all their life. And it becomes very difficult sometimes for people to conceptualize things. I think unless they have been exposed to a lot of imaginative imagery. I have always found that comic book and science fiction fans are much easier to talk to about these concepts. Yeah, me too. You might be able to tell. You might be able to tell by some of the things behind me here, but yeah. I mean, I've got an original Hawkman painting up there by Sheldon Moldoff and some other stuff. So, and in fact, I got into this field because of science fiction and comic books. That's what put me there. Just not from the horror side, which is where seemingly the ghost hunters seem to come from. They love the ghosts, the scary stuff. And I tend to think that when you talk to people, whether they're scientifically trained or not, if they have been exposed to a lot of unusual concepts, again, science fiction does that, it's much easier to get them to speculate, to actually kind of think about these things and possibly go down those rabbit holes with you pretty easily. Too many people just are stuck with what they think the reality is that we've got here.
Yeah. I mean, I was just left as a young boy, being a latchkey kid, and my mother was a single parent, and so I was just left with my imagination. At 4, I realized I could see through my hands, see through the wall. I was like, okay, there's no one telling me otherwise. My mother would just say, if you can think it, it can be realized. I'm like, okay, whatever that means. But I started to grow on that. Good. I think when I died for 40 minutes at the age of 8. I was hit by a car. And so I popped out of my body like Peter Pan, flying around, observing my lifeless body as my mother ran to the side of the road. And literally, it was just incredible. This is the superhuman shit that I've been dreaming about. And then it wasn't until they put my body down at the hospital bed that I was just drawn back in. But I spent this seemingly unlimited amount of time observing the whole experience. And it wasn't the cookie cutter textbook version where a panel of 12 came in and said, you must choose between this realm and that realm. And, I mean, it's subjective, guys, ladies and gentlemen and ladies. Whatever you're experiencing, whatever you're bringing into your experience is what you're going to experience. You don't have to be disappointed if you didn't get the whole soul review and this happened and that happened. I mean, people get so caught up in what is supposed to be. And, that really just projected me into more potential, because it was very, very tangible. And I think it evoked a lot of things that by the time I got to 17, when I meditated for the first time, that's when I stopped sound. And I was like, this is the superhuman shit. The Hulk, Superman, Batman. This is what I'm talking about. And that's, I think that's probably motivated you. It excited you, superheroes.
Yeah, superheroes certainly did. the science, I discovered science books and parapsychology when I was a kid also, but the superhero stuff, Star Trek, I'm a diehard Star Trek fan from way back. And there were so many things that I encountered, including when my dad worked for NBC. So because there was an RCA family store, RCA owned the company, I had a TV set apparently in my room when I was 2 years old. So I am a product of the TV generation, but I also grew up being behind the scenes. I spent a lot of time at 30 Rockefeller Plaza in New York City, where my dad was a producer, and understood how TV was made. But one of the TV shows that I remembered from a kid, and I watched it throughout reruns in the 60s, and it's still out there on YouTube. There's some episodes. It was a show called Topper. And Topper was about this banker who buys the house of some of his former clients who died in an avalanche in Switzerland skiing, and their ghosts show back up. And it was a sitcom. It's actually based on a 1926 book. There was a movie in the 30s with Cary Grant playing one of the ghosts, and the ghosts were friendly. I mean, this was not horror. This was normal people after death. So normal that they still drank. So really, that was one of the things that got me into the ghost stuff. But then the comic book stuff, there were so many psychic concepts in comic books, in the Superman comics, and not so much the early Batman comics, but certainly in Superman and Justice League and things like that. And I started really looking into it and found that there actually was a science that was looking into this. And there were a lot of people who were doing these things. It just never seemed, I think because of science fiction, never seemed to be out of the realm of possibility or probability for me when I was growing up. And so I still try to bring a lot of that into what I teach when I teach that we have potential. I mean, there was the human potential movement, of course. And I think it sort of fell flat in the 70s for a number of reasons, but there are people out there who are still pushing the boundaries. Human beings have more potential than what the world would like us to think. And we have to start believing that, because that drives innovation. It drives a lot of things for us. It drives certainly being psychic or picking up on these things. You had a near-death experience. And by the way, not everybody sees a tunnel. So, I mean, that's, if you're looking at the literature, and I've talked to many people, not everybody has that same experience. There was even a study that showed that Hindus would see potentially Hindu gods. Christians would often meet a saint if they're Catholic, or maybe Jesus, or just a light. I kiddingly, and I've talked to a couple of the near-death researchers, we kiddingly say, if you're Jewish, you'll run into your great-grandmother who was there with a bowl of chicken soup. It varies from culture to culture. In Japan, I talked to several people in Japan when I was over there for Japanese television, talking about near-death experiences. Shinto people that I spoke to expressed that, who had near-death experiences, they didn't see a tunnel. There was a bridge over a stream or a river, and they crossed the bridge instead of going through a tunnel. Nice sunny day, beautiful garden, and one of their ancestors was there waiting for them, who told them to come back or talk things out with them. So there is that subjective element that seems to be based on what we can accept as human beings, but that may not be the experience if you're not going to come back. I mean, that may not be what happens when you completely end up on through that process. But it's run the gamut, and people who come back, a small percentage of people, especially having that experience and especially having the out-of-body experience also, find themselves often with expanded psychic abilities, whether it's healing, some other PK ability, more clairvoyant or precognitive, all of those things come through. They are fully accepting that consciousness is more. They're fully and they have a better potential for developing even more than that. And they also have a very different outlook on life, which is really important as well. So it can be transformative for people. It's been scary for a few people. I tend to think, I talked to one guy who said he saw the devil. He grew up in a fire and brimstone fundamentalist religion, and I was not surprised, honestly. So,
Yeah, we are creators of our own.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, the mediums I work with say, that we're always asked about heaven and hell, and they're like, yeah, there's no heaven or hell per se, but when you're confronted with everything you did in your life, you think all of that comes rushing back to you after you die. Maybe you're putting yourself in hell at that point.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, don't mention the boogeyman more than twice, or by the third time he's going to turn up. I mean, it's kind of, I mean, it happens to me often. I'll literally have 10 years without dealing with someone that feels as though they need to be exercised of some internal confusion. And now that I've mentioned the word exorcism, without question, I'll end up with 10 people going, "Oh my goodness, I need help." It just happens. They turn up. It just becomes. But quite frankly, I need to remind people that's of their making. That's a little bit of they only get to that point where they'll start accepting it after they've gone through every other way of trying to reframe things. Or they're still lucid enough that they can differentiate between, a mind virus like a psychotic break and actually who they really are. And sometimes whoever's in that hot seat with me has got to a place where they've tasted both, and they're not completely gone, where they're in one, the needles move from one side to the other. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I actually was teaching at a local school, hypnotherapy school. It's a very lengthy hypnotherapy training for licensing in California. For this district school, it's like 200 hours of training in hypnotherapy, and it includes part of it on spirit releasement therapy, what people will often call exorcism. The idea that attachment, which is not actually possession, but it's still spirit influencing you, a spirit influencing you. And Holly teaches this method that allows people in hypnosis to confront whoever that is and get rid of that energy. And as she put it, she's not very psychic, so she's just accepting that there is that, but it works either way, whether there is a spirit there or not, which is, I think, very telling. I mean, it may be that there always is a spirit, or it may be that there always isn't a spirit. And except I do know I've sent people there where a psychic has said you have an attachment, you have a spirit that's with you, and you need to split off from that. So we kind of run at it a slightly different way, certainly different language. Because whenever I use the word exorcism, it brings up images. You got to be careful in my field because it brings up images of the movie, The Exorcist.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, if I had a penny for how many times I've actually experienced that, I'd be a very rich man. Yeah. I remember I had my mother at a channeling workshop about 20 years ago, and I always teach people in couples where one's receiving, the other one's taking information, asking questions. And this one girl, her whole mission, her desire was to become a big badass exorcist. And so that was her. She was obsessed. Every time she would come to class, she'd have like 175 clingers. Like I could see in her field all these other entities that she's drawing in. She wants to play with all this kind of stuff, where you have to release this stuff. And I would do it without, making a big deal of it. It's not going like walking up to a fat person going, "You're fat." It makes no sense. It's as stupid as anything. The obvious is obvious. So she started channeling her, which seemed to be some benevolent energy, very soft-spoken, sort of a young boy. And then I started watching all these energies coming into her field. And I'm like, okay, that's not what it is. Step back, let me have a conversation. And then all of a sudden, inside of 3 seconds, eyes go white, head spins, body spins around. She gets thrown across the room. And then the entity starts to talk. This is all conjured up by how obsessed she was with these type of energies. And people are like, "Well, is Freddy Krueger real? Is Michael Myers?" I said, if you put enough energy into anything, you can create something. So if you want to believe this, the deep-seatedly psychotic, dark crevices of Wes Craven's mind that put together Freddy Krueger, you want to put an altar towards this character, you will be able to experience the energy behind it because you are creating a relation. You are forming this as matter. You are putting the attention and intention together. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thought forms. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thought
Yeah.
forms, of course, there's a Tibetan tradition of the tulpas where they, put enough thought in, a master puts enough thought into creating a character, and that character becomes real in many respects. There are cases that seem to border on the thought form thing, especially when we hear from people that there's some clearly fictional character that is hanging around. And it's like, well, that person never lived. So you're probably creating that, again, usually because of some obsession or some too much energy put into it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then, you can't sleep at night. There's something under the bed. I'm forever in excitement and fear. I mean, it's that type of stuff. I think everything that we're embarking on or we're sharing with people in this conversation today, fearlessness should be a byproduct that comes from understanding that none of this
Right.
is a constant or an absolute. I think the takeaway is that subjectivity, and then how much can you disassociate without becoming obsessed?
I get asked often if I've ever been afraid, including on podcasts when I do investigations. And my answer is I am not afraid of anything paranormal at all. I have an understanding of that. I don't believe that unless I allow things to hurt me, that I can be hurt that way. However, yeah, there have been living people who have scared the hell out of me when I've gone on cases, because living people carry guns and knives, and spirits do not. So it really is. It really is what you accept. The fearlessness of these things is really important, and part of that does come with understanding, I think. It's just a matter of accepting that we are more powerful, that we have the power. One of the mediums I've worked with through the Forever Family Foundation was asked at one of the sessions, aren't you, because she went into trance like spontaneously for a bit, and somebody was speaking through her. And somebody asked, aren't you afraid they're going to possess you? Stick around. And her response was, I'm living, they're dead. I can just kick them out. I tell them to go, they go.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a very good attitude.
Yeah.
Has to be so important.
Yeah. But I do want to mention one thing though, that we've run into in our field. And that is that there are cases, what we call poltergeist phenomena, which is physical activity caused by somebody's unconscious typically. Sometimes there's a neurological issue, but it's usually stress, and it's just a literal, you're bottling up stress and other things, and now it's blowing out. That's basically what it is. And there have been some cases where the activity is directed at the person themselves. So I had a case where a woman believed that she was being choked by some big shadowy figure. It connected to every time she was going to talk to, or just after she talked to a therapist about recovered memories of her father molesting her as a child, but she was positive this wasn't her father. It was the guilt of talking about this to the therapist that generated this activity. And we saw an actual attack. We didn't see the shadow. I had a psychic with me, she was a psychic and psychologist. And the woman's throat bulged out, finger depressions appeared on both sides, but it left as soon as I yelled at it, whatever it was. And, as long as you are very forceful, and I probably dropped a few F-bombs myself when I said that. I am originally from New York, so I became a New Yorker, and told her it would never happen again. And it didn't, partly, I don't think because of what I said, but because we then figured out what was connected to that. There have been other cases where typically women, but there have been some men who felt like they were being sexually attacked in bed. And inevitably, the few cases that we had like that, one of my colleagues had a couple and others had others, there were sexual issues that they had with their partners or just in general. So the focus of the activity, the way that they were generating it, was on themselves. But even bringing in someone sensitive to spirit energy and things like that did not find any of that, even during the attacks. So it's really more about, we do have this telekinetic ability. It can come out spontaneously, and it can come out in a negative way if you believe that you are a victim and are being attacked by that.
Yeah. I mean, it's can get real interesting real fast.
Yeah.
What are I always explain to people how sometimes they wonder how they get into a violent vibratory state that just pops them off into the astral plane. And I've noticed over the years that fundamentally this version of sleep paralysis is a dampening of the respiration, which garners and compresses the energy in the body, which someone could have sleep apnea, and this is quite common. It's like inability and restriction of that flow starts to store the energy, which fundamentally just pops the spirit out. And I teach people exercises like that, but I always tell people it's a one-off to start with your training wheels. The need for sleep paralysis or shutting the body down is unnecessary. And if someone teaches you that, that's kind of like some really old shit that needs to be reframed, I believe. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, if you look at the research, the sleep research, I mean, I wrote a book called Psychic Dreaming, talking about that, but also looking at issues of sleep in general. When we're dreaming, when we're in the dream state, our bodies actually are paralyzed, relatively speaking. Otherwise, there have been studies that show that hooking people up to EEGs and other sensors, that the neurons in your brain, the pathways that are if you're dreaming about running, the same pattern of neuronal activity is happening as if you were physically running. So the signals are going to your body to run. There is a disorder where people do not have sleep paralysis during the dream state, and they will act out what's in their dreams physically, which is very dangerous for a partner at that point. So sleep paralysis happens when we go into the REM state, and we come out of it. And normally we come out pretty much all at once, but everyone I know has experienced waking up in the middle of the night from a dream or that state where a limb is like not even numb. It's just like flops around. And then you eventually get feeling back in it and such, because the sleep paralysis process coming out of it has failed completely. If it happens to your torso, and this may relate to the energy flow that you're talking about, if it happens to your torso where part of your central body is not out of paralysis at that point, that's when it absolutely feels like somebody's sitting on your chest, because you're not able to control everything that's there for that. So it's not a psychic thing. Now, some people do have an out-of-body experience in that state, but usually the out-of-body experience spontaneously happens to people when they're coming awake, the hypnagogic state, when they're coming awake or even going into a sleep, just a deep sleep at some point. The folks who could do it on demand, like Ingo Swann and Alex Tennis, Keith Harari, other folks that I've known, have had personal processes to get into the state so they could leave their body, but they also experience it since they were kids. So I know that it's not always easy to translate to the rest of us for that.
Yeah, I mean, I experience lucidity is what we call it now. I mean, my attention might be biologically, physiologically on you, but I'm experiencing, gradients of cold ice in Alaska, walking through the snow with my bare feet. And it's a visceral somatic thing.
Sure.
And what happens is, seeing the periphery just turns to black. Even though I'm looking at you, it's black. And then all of a sudden the projector screen puts me in that state. So I'm now in a third person perspective where I can see this body and now I'm watching something else. So I'm not actually, you won't see my body. It's first person, third person, then no person. And so if you were a video gamer, you would be the first person where you'd see the screen and you're holding the gun and your hands are in front of you. Then the third person aspect is where you see your whole body in front of you. And then finally, there's no person where you are everything. And that's just a conditioned process for a Taoist alchemist anyway. And so I experienced all that. Everything has a charge to it. So when I look at it, it has actual charge. Like it creates an outline, like a neon outline of everything I'm watching. And it holds visceral charge. And if I walk people through these processes, normally when I do some past life readings, they will witness it within their third eye projector screen, and they'll viscerally feel it. So I'll speak through something. Oh, you're going through this. This is your da-da-da-da. And they'll be like, I can see it. I can feel it. Yeah, it's part of the process.
Makes sense. That makes good sense. Yeah.
Yeah. And, it's like you got to be able to hop on one leg and juggle at the same time. You have to battle test this stuff, or it's kind of just all fleeting moments of psychosis in your mind. Are you really experiencing? That's the big deal.
Right.
And I think that's where so many people get kind of lost, as you and I just said briefly over our time today, is like, there's so much information. It's like it can be overwhelming to whether it is, of any value or not, because the internet is just like, hey, I'm here. I'll tell you how reality is. Okay. What's your name? John Smith. Okay. And, you could do 1,000 videos like that. There are 1,000 people with their own versions. That's great. But if someone's attempting to apply something like that for their own experience, you get to struggle with the human condition. And that human condition is radioactive. It's heteroactive. I dare anyone to walk up to a door, open it, and not close it. You must complete what you have started. A natural course of selection, right?
Yeah.
It's a habit. It's like, and that people flip out when they go, I just open it. I have to close it. Like, why? Why do what the classic word to keep someone in a rat in a wheel? Why do you have to close it? And, then we get onto the onslaught of linguistics that can be quite manipulative. That's how we get people out there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We're dealing, when you're dealing with anyone in general, any human being, we're hardwired in some ways. And then we have a lot of programming that we come through. One of the things that I'm constantly dealing with some of the ghost hunter stuff that they present is that they will see faces in different things, right? But that idea of pareidolia, of us looking for patterns, that is hardwired into us. That's why you can look at a cloud and see a bunny rabbit, and 5 seconds later, this cloud has shifted and somebody else sees something else at that point. That is part of us. Then seeing the bunny rabbit, though, I have to have seen a bunny rabbit or Bugs Bunny before. Otherwise, I'm going to interpret it somewhat differently, depending on the cultural background that's there. And talking to anyone about any of this stuff, the why is important. I mean, I have had people tell me that they want to become psychics. Like, why? We've had people, the Forever Family Foundation, which I'm president of, we run certification testing, which is a very scientific process. Only about 10% of the people who take it pass. But the fact is that we get calls, and have for years, from people who say, my uncle just died and I saw him and talked to him for a moment after he passed away. I must be a medium. It's like, no, you had an experience with your uncle's spirit. Can you call him back? Can you control that? Can you do any of that? That's a spirit communication. That's not necessarily being in control of your abilities. And people, when you ask them, why do you want to learn to do that? A lot of people sputter. They don't know why. They just know that because they had an experience, they must be psychic, or must be a psychic. Not everybody's psychic. Must be a psychic. But there's just sometimes, some people want to do it for personal enrichment and enlightenment. Some people want to do it to help other people. I mean, the why is really important. And I think that not enough people who are in the amateur end of my field ask the whys. They don't even ask the spirit, why are you here? They don't even ask, why is this happening? They just like to get their spirit voices on tape,
Yeah.
which are not even generally spirit voices.
Yeah, I mean, it's loads of fun, coming across hotspots and experiencing things like that. A disbeliever is when I have a spirit walk through your body and the whole gradient of your sensory perception changes because it's somatic, it's visceral.
Well,
It's
having
like
having had
and your eyes are open, and I'm like, let me have him walk through you, bang, and I'm not doing anything. I'm just standing here as your whole eyes open up like a saucer because an entity has entered and exited your body, changing the whole grade of it, the temperature, everything. And you can't do anything with that but go, that just happened. I love it with things like vortices and hotspots and grids. When you're talking to someone like this in an unassuming conversation, and go, oh look, there's eight different hotspots in your house, 2 vortices, this, that, something else, and they're like, really? I'll go to this point here, and they'll go to that space, and they'll be like, I can feel that. What is going on here now? You could say that I, preloaded them to their suggestibility. And so what happens is their eyes are open. Go back to it tomorrow when we're not having the conversation. They're like, holy shit, it's still there. Yeah, yeah. And your ability to sense that's the biggest thing that people have is the desensitization.
Mhm.
They're not aroused enough to be able to experience different gradients of energy. So they can miss a lot of stuff in the process because of their own training, or specifically when opening up channels within in our chemical process, we open up the lung channel as the most corrupted one, which is the immediate result of sensory perception. It goes deep.
Yeah, well, I've been walked through multiple times by a spirit in one of my cases, but it was a very friendly, pleasant experience. Let's put it that way. When we get calls about hauntings, we're talking mainly about repetitive information pattern stuff. Those are the hotspots that you're talking about. And in fact, in many of those instances, one of the reasons we started using environmental sensors like an EMF meter and temperature sensors is because people reported things. And interestingly enough, while not all of our cases have this kind of correlation, in many of the haunting cases, again, we're not talking about spirits being there, it's an imprint of energy of past people who have been there. The spot in which they perceive this figure or the activity does tend to have a difference in electromagnetic field to everywhere else in the room, for example. Even turning the power off on the house and considering the device is supposed to pick up only electrically powered things and not like natural things, there's something else going on, clearly. And there have been instances where using geomagnetic sensors have found geomagnetic energy, but not on the ground, on the top floor of a building, which makes no sense at all. So there's something here in the environment, the energy you're talking about for these hotspots, that holds information very often, but that people can feel, and somehow is affecting devices that shouldn't be able to detect that, to be affected in that way.
I found a hotspot down at the Luxor at the end of the strip near Mandalay Bay. Treasure trove, probably 60 spirits of people that were buried there without their free will. Put it that way. That was before the hotel was put on. Then there was also, then there was also an Indian tribe, and then they integrated all these entities that came in through the Egyptian geometry. So there was just hordes of these entities moving in and around that space. It was so dense. I mean, you and I can feel the density of what I'm speaking of right now. You feel the sensitiveness of it because it's happening. But when it comes down to it, it's like, you can't make this shit up. It's like they would bring me to the front of the hotel, and I'd notice there's 2 entities protecting the doorway, and created a space where people would constantly slip and fall. And I asked one of the bellhops, it's like, is this a problematic issue. It's like we have someone falling there at least once or twice a day, has been ever since. And because it's a hotspot, they're deliberately creating a space where they're going to be off-centered and off-kiltered and cut from the earth when they step over this landmine. And so also the geometry, when you start looking at it, these casinos pay a lot of money for people to set things up specifically. I noticed that through Caesars, where if you walk in a certain door within Caesars, you're going to either win or lose. And they gave me a system of go to this particular statue, speak to it, the spirit, and then move to this particular table, and your luck will be good. And the geometry was set up in the tiles, in the building. There are no coincidences. And people freak out when they start going, who made this stuff up? That's why they pay people to do this type of architecture. They're going deep. People think, oh, it's just some random thing they're doing, using all the electronics. And gambling is no, they're doing anything and everything they can pull in to make sure you lose your money.
Sure. Yeah. Makes sense. I mean, if I was a casino, I'd do that too.
I mean, you're like, that sounds so absurd. No.
Well, yeah, if it wasn't absurd, they wouldn't kick psychics out. They wouldn't.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's the thing is that the mainstream may say this stuff doesn't work or doesn't exist, but from a practical perspective, people believe it. I mean, the majority of people in the United States do believe in some form of psychic ability or psychic power or energy systems, things like that. And to say that they don't, you can go along all your life saying, well, none of this exists. This is all, and you may never experience anything because part of you is not letting you notice it or even acknowledge it for that, which is a sad state of affairs, I think, because you're missing out on a good part of the world.
Yeah, big time.
Yeah.
And, this brings us to the end of this incredible conversation. Where can people find you in some of the things we want to talk about? Some of the things you mentioned that you're involved with.
Sure.
So
the easiest thing to do is to go to my website, which is LoydAuerbach.com. You can see the spelling right in front. It is one L, so you have to be careful about spelling it correctly. My books are all there. There's a parapsychology resources online page, which tells you, how to contact all sorts of organizations that are there. I don't have a calendar of events per se, but I will be doing something in the future for that. But I do have a media page, which has a lot of other interviews. And then there is some additional information available on the phenomena as well. That's there. You can also join my podcast, which is typically every other Sunday, although I'm going to skip 3 weeks. Next one I have coming up, I'm going December 21st, and then I'm switching 3 weeks to January 11th will be the first of 2026. I actually going to have a guest. Normally, I do this on my own. This is called Ask Professor Paranormal. It's on YouTube. It's youtube.com/@AskProfessorParanormal. And people ask me all sorts of questions. But I will be having Steve Gonsalves, who was the only person on the TV show Ghost Hunters who knew anything about parapsychology. And Steve and I are going to have an interesting conversation about reality TV and about all of this stuff as well. But it'll be every 2 weeks after that. And that's Sunday evenings. Again, it'll be January 11th, Sunday evening at 8:30 Eastern, 5:30 Pacific. You can just go to the channel or link out from my website is probably the easiest thing. You can also link to the Rhine Research Center, where I teach courses. I'm one of the instructors. We have online courses. Our next one's start up in February. And that's just Rhine.org. And just go to the education page to see what's coming. Although we'll have our new classes listed by the end of December. And then the Forever Family Foundation, which I've mentioned, which works with spirit mediums in the family grieving process and generally supporting the research on life after death, is just foreverfamilyfoundation.org.
Fantastic, my friend. Well, this has been delightful. Thank you for coming on and sharing your wisdom with the audience. And we'll have to do this again sometime.
Sure. Sounds good. Thank you, San.
Thank you. And thank you. And thank the audience for sharing their time with us today. I am your humble servant and Sifu, Taoist Master San Qing. I'll see you in the next one, guys.